And I can see people are filtering in now. We'll give it just a couple of minutes for the folks that are joining to let everyone join. I know the sessions are a bit back to back, so we'll get started in just a minute. For everyone joining, just so you know, we're just going to give it just a minute or two to let everyone filter from the last session into this one, and then we will get started. As you're joining, you should see a poll question on your screen. If you'd like to submit an answer, you can do so now.
So Michael, Barb, are you seeing Sarah have or is it just me?
No, I am.
Yeah, great. Okay, so Sarah, there may be a little bit of a connection issue. So until yours catches up, why don't I take the intros for now? And this is part of the normal virtual conference world. We're all getting used to having a few glitches. It makes it more charming and more lovable. So we'll give it a minute or so as folks are pouring into our virtual room here, and then behind us, you can see that we've been very lucky to have a terrific group of sponsors for our Spokes 2020. I went to a number of the events last night, the small virtual sessions that were run by all of the terrific partners below. And I have to say, in the best spirit of trying something and trying it out and seeing how it works, it was honestly, it was really warm little sessions where everybody got to catch up. It's not the same, as we know, when you have a kind of a full room and we can actually talk to each other in person. But I really enjoyed all of the events that our partners hosted, and it was great to see folks doing them all here yesterday and this morning. So I see we still are getting a few folks in the room. I'll give it one more minute, and then Sarah, you back live now? I don't know if yours is picking up.
Yes, can you guys hear me again?
Yep.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
It's no worries at all. Nope, we lost you again, so I'll jump in. How about this? Okay, I can see folks kind of jumping into the room.
As it looks like most
Sarah, I think we're losing you, so I'll just go ahead and jump in.
It looks like most people have.
Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and start our panel off. First of all, Sarah, thank you for starting it off. I know it's hard, in some of these situations, but we're really excited about this Privacy Leaders panel here today. In the context of our overall Spokes conference, we've been able to open and have a lot of discussions that are about the roles that our folks in our community are playing as leaders in the community, helping our companies with these significant employment, health, human rights, civil rights issues that are going on all over our community. I think we all heard Helen Dixon talk about how the human rights agenda in Europe and the privacy agenda in Europe and the enforcement agenda is not stopping as a result of the COVID shutdown. We've heard a lot of very thoughtful panelists who are leaders in their companies, leaders in their communities, talking about how they're engaging with their companies and leading at this moment in terms of helping with some of the specific COVID issues and other broad social movement issues. And it's in that context that we bring this terrific group of privacy leaders that most of the folks in our community already know quite well. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce our three panelists today. Barb Lawler is the Chief Privacy and Data Ethics Officer at Looker. Mike McCullough is the Chief Privacy Officer and Vice President of Enterprise Information Management at Macy's. And Ruby Zeffo is the Chief Privacy Officer at Uber. Ruby, Michael, Barb, great to see you and welcome to our panel today. Delighted to have you here today. As we had been talking and preparing even for this panel and listening to our community and all of the participants who are coming from a lot of different walks of life to the Spokes Conference, one of the things that really struck me is that each of you in these last few years have led huge and significant privacy teams, and then also the strategic vision for your companies, especially on this area, but also participated in a lot of other similar issues at times in which your respective companies went through major changes. Each of you can talk about that in your own stead. And then even in the midst of all of those changes comes COVID-19 and the shutdowns, and then came a lot more. Obviously, even since I've seen you all in person, it feels like we're in another world. I mean, it's such a different world for each of us. So I wanted to start with something that I think would be meaningful for everybody who's listening today, which is, how did you help lead your organizations through changes before COVID-19 and the shutdowns that came? And how are you leading it now? How are you able to lead your teams and stay connected and lead and keep these issues on the agenda in moments of crisis? So I'm going to turn it over to Michael, you first.
Sure.
Obviously a lot of growth last year, but also some severe shutdowns, and talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, thank you, Justin, and the Wireable team for having me. You and your sponsors have done an amazing job, a really bang-up job reimagining these video conferences with the baby goat yoga and the coffees, and that's fantastic. I'm excited and grateful to be here with Barb and Ruby, two practitioners I deeply respect. So looking forward to it. I would be remiss if I said I'm not speaking for Macy's at this point. I'm speaking in a personal capacity as I'm currently furloughed. So to answer your question, leading through change in privacy and data protection is the order of the day. That's the order every day. We have to manage the day-to-day, but we also have to keep a constant eye on the horizon to advise and prepare and set expectations for leadership. As strategy is defined, as well as steering a course for your privacy management program that first supports business objectives, and second is anticipatory, aligning and building capabilities with all that entails: budget, staffing, getting on roadmaps, aligning capabilities with what's next, the least amount of friction and disruption while delivering the best results in ROI. So to your question of learnings from past crises, I would say, plans are useless. Planning and practice is everything. Be planful. I know we all have business continuity, crisis response, and recovery plans. Those have to be living references that are, they're not packed away in the sole province of your resilience team or a manager. They need to be hauled up periodically, critically examined, updated, and practiced. There are always opportunities for improvement based on lessons learned, new information, operating environment changes. For example, companies may look at pandemic insurance differently now. Also, by the way, there's pandemic insurance. The most disruptive, impactful crises are when, not if. So I spend a lot of time improving and updating our data breach response plans, and we practice to that, to the point that it becomes almost muscle memory. That muscle memory serves us well when navigating the fog of initial responses through remediation, which could be years. We also do a lot of hot washes for important events to critically assess ourselves and to make improvements and to systematize and reinforce the things that we do well or that we did well. Going back to the question of leading through change, for me, again, it's being planful and stepwise. So moving from the abstract to practice to what I actually do. I'm laser focused on consistency and minimizing the effects and opportunity costs and discomfort that comes with change. I'm also very focused on measurability and demonstrability, which means all the work I do is based around frameworks, with a lot of training on frameworks, thinking expansively and critically, and also focusing on approach. So I take perhaps a unique approach to privacy, data protection and security risk, governance, compliance, and vendor management as well. And also aligned service groups such as our legal team, audit, DSR teams. We have a framework. It's a 3-step process for new or renewing data uses. Briefly, step 1 starts with the data. We've classified all the data we care about. Teams tell us what data they're using, or in the case of breach, data potentially exposed. And we have a risk matrixing model that assesses inherent risk in the data based on sensitivity, volume, velocity, user groups, external requirements, and other factors. We apply the built-in risk mitigators, such as encryption or SOC 2, if we're sharing with a third party if it's appropriate. So based on the data analysis, we generate a risk score, and that defines the path that the project will go down. So step 2, we interrogate the use and adherence to the policy of the project. And this is the opportunity to really start the conversation on data minimization, required notices, ensure ROPAs, and to apply potential controls. Step 3 is the approval process. So this is the consistent, repeatable approach that delivers historicity of decisioning and demonstrability of the standard of care. So that in a nutshell is the foundational approach. But the question was leading through change. While we do this work well, I'm always thinking about how can we pathfind through what's new, what's now, what's next. And it became clear to me that there are increasingly intangible risks affecting brand that are more than procedural and standards-based. So I've been working on a step 3A, which I call FAIR, because I'm unabashedly an unclever acronyms guy. But FAIR is a working group. It includes senior legal, business, diversity, risk, and other leaders that represent the brand. So in evaluating facial recognition use, new and novel big umbrella AI experiments, and data, which is important to build and maintain. It's important to build and maintain trust relationships at a time when all businesses want to go to a one-to-one relationship and meaningful personalization at a time of deep sensitivity to race issues and an increasing percentage of the population who view themselves as gender non-binary. So that's one way that I'm leading and improving our posture, irrespective of the pandemic, and continuing to drive towards achieving business goals. So I know Ruby could write volumes on this. What do you think of Ruby?
Yeah, Ruby, I mean, you've had, Michael, thank you for that. And obviously we'll come back to you, Michael, in a moment. Huge changes even at Macy's that you had to deal with as a leader. But Ruby, there are very few companies that have achieved, had so much front page news, a huge IPO constantly, on the front page, but then growth and then COVID, and a lot of us, you're so engaged with your company. So why don't we turn to you?
Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, for that overview. That was a really good sort of mini deep dive. I'm going to tackle this question in a bit of a different way. I was hired to mature Uber's privacy practices. It's as simple as that, pre-IPO. So I got to really dig into kind of building a new program based on law and ethics and principles. And then I got to see the IPO, which I've never done before. I've always worked for public companies. And so those were just enormous and quick paced changes to live through and to lead a team through. And it's not just about legal compliance. One of the first things I did was work with the team on instilling some privacy principles that we then launched across the company. And then as a public company, with the advent of COVID, it was almost instantaneous that we had to pivot our business focus. I mean, this is not a secret. And that was just an enormous undertaking on such a short period of time for everyone at the company, while we're also still dealing with COVID-specific issues with our employees and with our partners in the business. So while we're moving the business to different revenue streams, we're also focusing on a bunch of now health-related projects that we had never had to do before. So, the first thing we started doing was giving away millions of rides and food deliveries to seniors and healthcare workers and other people at risk. We did matching donations for restaurant employee relief. We provided reimbursement for drivers to get masks and sanitizer. we started requiring masks for all users. And then we thought, how do we make sure a driver has a mask on? I mean, these are all issues of first impression. And we said, well, we don't want it to be processing any biometric information. To your point of privacy doesn't get lost just because you're in a crisis. So all it does is it's an object detector, which looks to see if the driver has that mask object on the face. There's no processing of biometric information. So you can see the privacy team was brought in on all of these new initiatives. And that brings me back to your point of privacy cannot be getting lost right now. The CPO needs to find a way to keep privacy on the agenda, and times of crisis make it that much more important. And so for people who are paying attention at the health data flying around and then tying that to geolocation data, privacy is not taking a backseat. It's driving all kinds of new initiatives and new things to think about. So the privacy and security of video conferencing apps, which we're using right now, data security when working from home, especially as companies try to adopt new technologies they've never used before, vendors they've never used before. And then that brings up the question of surveillance of employees. I was reading yesterday about a new initiative for financial traders and stuff, and they should be watched at home and what they're doing, because if they were on the trading floor, they would be watched. Student privacy. When I have a kid in college, all the classes are online. What's happening with that data? Government data sharing. Where's all the data going? New technologies like contact tracing apps. And then, of course, every time there's anything horrible going on in the world, you have scammers trying to take advantage of everybody with phishing expeditions and other things that we all have to look out for as that final, hammer that falls. So I'm sure Helen talked about this yesterday, how DPAs around the world are saying, hey, there is no reason to give up on privacy now. You have got to continue focusing on this fundamental human right. It's more important now than ever. They're not giving up on enforcement. And so we have to bring that to the forefront, executives, and find a way to do that. And if the US, having no omnibus federal law, not even quite frankly, in my opinion, close to being passed, can come up really quickly with two competing COVID-related laws, then I think, everybody should be paying attention and able to focus on doing things better, not worse. And lastly, I want to say something as a leader. I have to say an extraordinary amount of my time, which I love managing people and leading people anyway, but an extraordinary amount of my time now is spent on making sure people are okay, that they're motivated, that they're doing okay in their work. I'm reevaluating how they're working. What other responsibilities do they have at home? How is this impacting marginalized people already? And so even though oil is the fuel of the digital economy, guess what? The other fuel is still people. And so it's very important to check in and also to keep yourself motivated, because I have to continue being upbeat and motivating people. That means I have to take care of myself better than I was in the past too. So that I think is a key element to success.
Ruby, that was terrific, and there's a lot to unpack with both what you and Michael covered. I think Sarah would have covered this, so my apologies for dropping the ball. Two things. One, our panelists are speaking for themselves, not for the organizations they're affiliated with. I wanted to make sure I said that up front. And then one of the things we really gain out of sessions like this that's I think really great about our community is you can actually ask questions of our leaders. So please, if you're joining us here today, post questions in the Q&A, and we're going to set aside some time towards the end of our session. We've set aside some time to actually take questions for what's meaningful for you, and that could be, how companies this large are thinking about opening up. It could be day to day. It could be how you lead with your team, exactly as Ruby was saying. And Sarah would have said this, but we also like to recognize folks. And so you'll get a spokes t-shirt if you get your questions in today. So, so Barb, I'm going to turn it to you before we talk about this issue. Obviously you've been at a number of very significant companies, and then Looker had a big transaction last year. And then you as well have been watching and leading a team through COVID-19. So what's your reaction, and how have you thought about leadership at this time?
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel today. I actually want to start with where Ruby left off, and some of my thoughts are, I think the first thing is when you think about really an unprecedented crisis for us at a business, personal, professional level around COVID is how we interact with and work with each other as human beings. And I think that's partly what Ruby was talking about. And so that is, how do you spend time with your team and also your extended team and your partners? And I think the first thing, and it's the hardest for us because we're looked at as being experts and being in that position of confidence and expertise and strength, is that in something like COVID, I think the first thing is to say to yourself and to acknowledge others, we don't know anything. We actually don't know anything, and that's okay. But there's also plenty of things that we do know. And that in a situation like COVID, nobody else does either. So we're all figuring it out as we go along. And I think actually starting and acknowledging that is really important. It also means that different people may be making decisions about what you do, where the issues are, recognizing that. I think calling it out and being direct about that is really helpful. I think then going more specifically to my role at Looker, when I joined Looker, it was to build a global privacy program for a private company that was going to go public. We were going to do IPO. And then Google Cloud came along with an offer that the company couldn't refuse. And so we had to shift over the last year from go on an IPO trajectory to an acquisition trajectory with what turned out to be a very long regulatory review cycle. So between when the deal was announced and when we closed, guess when we closed? We closed and onboarded to Google 3 days before shelter in place and the shutdown. So in that time, when you think about the massive amount of change, just joining a new organization, all things you have to do to onboard to a new company as if you were a new employee, those were all the activities that everyone was dealing with. So that's new computers, that's new emails, that's new calendars, that's new chat channels, that's all new processes, procedures, and training. And then how do we figure out this COVID thing? How do we respond? So where we focus first and where I focus with my team is, let's make sure we have that personal piece, that check-in piece. Let's look at what our plans are and what can we defer? What can we focus on in a quarter when we think this will be done? And obviously that's not true. And what do we still need to keep moving forward on? Because what that also does is give people some confidence with when you have something to look forward to. I've heard it described that COVID shelter in place is a lot like the never ending today. And what we really need is the tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And so for us, we had very specific things within the Looker privacy program, and then very specific milestones that, our acquiring organization, Google Cloud, was also asking us to do. And two other things I would add real quickly is that there are things that don't change besides the planning piece. So I liked how Michael said planful. Because I'm definitely a planner too, and recognizing what can be planned or where it needs to be big picture rather than really specific, is we found our customers, so our business customers, also need a lot of reassurance that we were still there and we were still running and we could still support them. And so being a part of that plan, and that cloud businesses in general are growing and expanding because of shelter in place, because of virtual work from home or virtual work from wherever that is. And that those are positive things. So an interesting driver of business growth, while at the same time working in a completely different fashion.
Barbara, that was again terrific. And building off of these core principles of how to lead at this time, I from leading our own organization, the sort of amount of time that we want to spend and we're spending with our team has really been a huge focus of ours, even at Wirewheel. And we're a much smaller organization, but eyes on your team, making sure folks aren't too isolated. There's just a lot more that we're thinking about to make sure that folks are okay. But that brings me to another big topic, which is, and we've spoken about this, I've seen each of you write about this in your own way, but we've talked about diversity and equality and how that's reflected in our privacy and data protection community. this is a very significant time for that. And when I mentioned even yesterday, I think we are trying to do better every day at this, and you know that you're never getting it quite right. You know, you're not doing as much as you can. Honestly, I don't think I do as much as I can. I don't think our company does it as much as we can, and we have to keep this as a persistent part of our conversations. But I think our community, you know, which is often focused on human rights as a fundamental view, needs to continue to help drive these issues, both in our community and in our companies. So how do you think about that? And if you don't mind, maybe I'll start with you, Michael, and then we'll go around and talk about this.
Sure. Well, this is a soul-crushing topic that we have to tackle it. We have to keep talking about it and keep tackling it. People of conscience and goodwill must constantly strive for fairness and egalitarianism in all aspects of our society. This is a painful time for me, and I know for many others. It's really hard to talk about sometimes, certainly in this setting, but I'm going to do it because it matters. Justin, I appreciate your candor and your openness and your clear commitment to having these conversations. I get asked a lot, personally and professionally, what are you? I mean, what's your background? And I respond generally cheerfully enough, well, I'm half black and half white. But none of that's even close to what I am. That's the most uninteresting, insipid question about me. I know most mean no harm. It may be of genuine interest, but it's really more about the asker, a crutch to know what box to put me in, even if subconsciously. Even if that's not the case, it feels like that's the case. So I'm black and white, as more and more people today are a mix of some races. And I say that in quotes. I grew up with the knowledge that my mere existence was unlawful in some quarters due to anti-miscegenation laws. And you'd be surprised possibly to know that, that repugnant language has remained in state constitutions after Loving v. Virginia, until 1987 in Mississippi, 1998 in South Carolina, 2000 in Alabama. But being both black and white, I know how hard this topic is. For some white people, there's guilt in facing up to one's own prejudices that are uncomfortable, or a semblance of shame for feeling they haven't done enough to be part of the solution, and a dozen other discomforting sensations. For many black folks, there's anguish, historical, living history, and immediate pain. Productive conversations are really hard when there's existential pain. And sometimes, at least for me, those conversations feel like bowling for soup and a poultice on a wound that's doing kind of just enough for an entry in the CSR. I, myself, and folks I've talked to are self-policing on how we even talk about racism and white supremacy. There's a hyper-awareness to be measured so as not to appear strident and feed into a stereotype. So this is my background to answer your question is, how do we think we can drive diversity and inclusion? Well, I think we all know this is an institutional, systemic problem. Structural discrimination doesn't require, conscious racist or sexist. We all know there's no silver bullet. All we can do is start tearing down those institutions, this increasingly colonizing white supremacy, archipelago, just taking it down one brick at a time. To be business owners really have to move from the compensatory to the reparative. So strategies for diversity and inclusion, commitments to reevaluate hiring practices, ensuring diversity in supply chain and vendors, those are all compensatory. As the adage goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We need to invest in building cultures of fairness and equity. We're probably all getting the emails and messaging from companies, stating their commitment to optimize diversity and inclusion, and their strategies to build an inclusive environment. But 130 years late, Aunt Jemima is being retired, as her Uncle Ben and Mrs. Butterworth's, and it's 2020. I mean, these are major companies. Something is wrong, very wrong. Then you have Ben and Jerry's statement, and I'm really shocked and I'm disappointed at their statement, which was called, "We must dismantle white supremacy. Silence is not an option." That was so shocking to so many. That is a stake in the ground. That's reparative. That's a culture bomb. I think we've gotten to the point where we can no longer be just pro-fairness, pro-equity, pro-diversity, pro-Black, pro-women, pro-Jewish, pro-Sikh. We have to become culturally anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-discriminatory. And that semantic difference matters. Here's why. Relevant to our worlds and what we control, we're very good at measuring and managing risk. There's always a balance and certain tolerances, calculus. But the purpose ultimately is economic and, in quotations, fiduciary. So within that calculus, we're less good at recognizing and accounting for harms. Bias harms are hard to tease out. And sometimes it's hard to get people to understand why bias harms are bad and should be cured, not managed. This is increasingly true when the harms are individualized, which is relevant more and more so as we increasingly pursue meaningful personalization. We're good at the big stuff. We're less good at the small stuff. I think we need to be hyper aware of how we group and categorize others, even if unintentionally. It can lead to harm. Categorization can lead to harm. So what are you? I mean, what's your background? This is a problem. It is a problem of categorization. And that categorization is a challenge. It's a challenge to dismantle, especially when it's profitable, because racism is productive. So to answer your question, what to do? We've all had that kind of rousing IT exec that makes a zero defect environment a mission. Is it achievable? No, it's not. But it gives purpose beyond traffic lighting, that we all get caught up in like a day-to-day environment. Likewise, we can set a standard as zero discrimination, zero harm in our data practices. It gives us a mission. It gives us purpose to what otherwise is simply just effective management. So this mission can be supported operationally by activities like adding and maintaining equity analysis for code audits. So many of the things, the other things that you can do, we've talked about it for years. Demanding not just diversity on boards, but people with a demonstrated commitment to fairness and equity as a mission. And I mean women, I mean people of color, I mean trans, I mean non-binary people. The co-founder of Reddit stepped down from the board and asked to be replaced by a person of color after recognizing his own white privilege that he had come to recognize due to his marriage to Serena Williams and after having biracial children. So I think commit to a diverse pipeline, curate talent, so don't just executive recruit at schools, invest in the programs, measure it, seek feedback internally, externally, go beyond seeking diverse images in your spaces, seek out and ensure diverse images, diverse image makers and storytellers are contributing to those spaces. Give it to groups that are challenging, give money at least to groups that are challenging and support to groups that are challenging, status quo approaches to technology, and be partners in experimentation. Challenge filter bubbles in your own organization. So when you have a lunchroom where it's consistently monochromatic, or there are little groups that are consistently together, break it up. There are things you can do to break that up. Seek diversity in your mentorship circle. Reverse mentor, particularly with diverse people. So I think we have an opportunity as a community not to further export existing biases and structural racism and sexism into code. It's time to start thinking about that and beginning to right that ship. And I think this is a singular moment to do that. I believe people, particularly in this community, are overwhelmingly good and fair. We choose careers that protect people, but complacency is not an option. This will not pass. We have to reframe and reshape, our corporate cultures. We have to be more than allies, but partners in liberation, fairness, and equity. So I believe deeply in free speech. I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. and I would fight and die to protect. Speech I find absolutely abhorrent. But racists and such should have no harbor in business, and we have to do more than just be pro. So I guess the last thing I'd say is, I just read a book with Future Privacy Forum called Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code. It's by Princeton sociologist Ruha Benjamin. She goes deep into the structures and encoding of white supremacy and the way that it affects code. It's absolutely revelatory. It's definitely worth the read, and hopefully would at least spark the imagination for what can we do.
Michael, I can tell even from the comments that if we were in the room together, you'd get a huge round of applause. I know you can't hear it, but I can tell. And I don't want it to be lost on the fact that we're sitting here virtually and you can't see each other. I can even see people weighing in that it was really moving to me. And it matters that you said that you talk about it. And, Ruby and Barb, you're both also, you've both been writing about this and thinking about this. Ruby, do you mind if I have you
Sure.
talk to? And but Michael, we're going to come back to this in a minute too.
Yeah.
Very, very thoughtful.
So first of all, I want to thank Michael for putting himself out there. It's not easy. We can see his struggle, but this is how we learn. And so I greatly appreciate that. And it's very helpful for all of us to hear it. Which brings me, I have several points here. I have been a women's advocate for many years and a mentor and trying to help some of these similar issues, but they're not the same for women. It's just, I'm sorry, but it's just not as bad as what's happening to Black people right now. But some of my learnings are applicable. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about. I want to start with educating yourself. It is not up to Black people to have this extra burden of telling us what we need to do. We need to figure some of this out by ourselves. And we do have to be anti-racist, anti-misogynist, anti-biased. And if you want to learn how, there is so much curated material already waiting and handy lists right on the internet for you to find. It's not hard, and that's a really good place to start. And with this better understanding, I am an action person. I am naturally very results oriented. It doesn't help me to read something and then go take a nap. I don't nap. I need to go take immediate action or I don't feel good. So here's just an example. Years ago, when unconscious bias was just like not really a thing yet, it was kind of in its nascent stages. And I said in a leadership meeting that we were having problems with how we were treating people. And I was challenged with, but we have a meritocracy. And I said, but a meritocracy full of bias isn't a meritocracy, which I thought was a completely non-inflammatory, logical statement. I did not expect a bad reaction. What happened was I was pretty much voted off the island. I got no support. And I got yelled at, in fact. And so I kept at it, though. I got expert speakers to talk to us who had more credibility than I do on the topic. I sent around articles. I told personal stories of how I was treated. And if it's going to happen to someone like me, imagine somebody quiet, retiring, less powerful in their job role. I gathered groups of women together, which was my target market at the time. I called out inappropriate behavior, and sometimes right in the middle of it. Sometimes I would pull somebody aside. I'd try to read the room on what was appropriate. And of course, I sought allies to help me. Others started doing the same thing, and pretty soon we had a movement. It seemed weird after a time that someone would have challenged me for having challenged what a meritocracy means. We couldn't believe that would have ever happened, but it had to be rolling thunder for that to happen. I had to get other people to help me with this movement. So if you're in an environment where you have D&I, a diversity and inclusion problem, and you don't have any solution in your orbit, you can start the movement. Studies show it only takes 16% of people to start a movement. And if you're a person with real influence, you need to help others get educated and motivated to take action too. So how? What kind of action are you supposed to take? Honestly, I look at objective behavior. It does not help me to understand how people think and feel about themselves. What are you actually doing, and how are you treating people? Are you a fair and unbiased person? But then when you go to meetings, you're cutting off the marginalized person. You're inadvertently taking their ideas. You're manspreading at the table so they don't get a seat at it, literally or virtually. These are behaviors I have seen so many times, plus more, over many years from people who deem themselves fair and unbiased. So you have to literally examine how you treat people. What are your patterns of behavior? What are you doing in meetings? Not just how you think and feel about yourself. And if you don't know, ask somebody else whom you trust to watch you and tell you. And then you have to take proactive steps to help others. For example, a few things Uber's doing right now, they're making $1 million donation to two organizations focused on racial justice and equality. We're promoting Black-owned restaurants and Uber Eats with no delivery fees till the end of the year. We are tying senior executives' pay to measurable progress, to Michael's point about measurement, on diversity goals, and we're continuing to publish diversity data in our workforce. But I personally wanted to do some things. I needed relief and to help other people. And I'm not saying these things are going to change the world, but they're helping real people. First, I educated myself. I went out and watched this wonderful PBS, you can stream it online, multi-part documentary on Reconstruction. The reason that was important is the history and how this problem is so persistent. It really spelled it out for me clearly in facts in a way that showed that right after the Civil War, things actually did get better, and then it was nastily ripped away as the South rose to power again. And it helped me understand the persistence of it, the lies that are told, the revisionist history, and how we got to where we are. And that helps me understand what the motivation was and how people still believe fake news and why these things happen. So that's the first thing I did. Then I started wanting to help people in my community. So I started donating to this thing for first month's rent for people literally on the other side of the freeway from me in a disadvantaged neighborhood who are in jobs that are being lost because the restaurant or whatever they are. And this helps them make their rent. These are people right across the way. And I feel good that I can help them pay their rent. That's something I can afford. Not everybody can, but I can. I'm putting a Black Lives Matter sign in my yard. I'm not a yard sign person. You may say, what good is that going to do? It's just a sign. I'll tell you what good it does. I've seen other types of sign in my neighborhood, and I don't like it. So we went on Nextdoor. We have literally several hundred people in my neighborhood going to post these signs. The reason is I want people who see the other signs to know there are hundreds of us who feel differently, and they should feel safe and welcome in our community. That's why I'm suddenly not a sign person putting a sign in my yard. And I'm making behavioral changes from myself. Some of these I put in a little LinkedIn article. Maybe that's what you're referring to, Justin. But I have to look at myself in the mirror, and I have to look at how I'm treating people and why I'm making extra efforts to reach out, particularly to marginalized people who are suffering right now, both on the job and off the job. So it starts with the man in the mirror, which is me.
Again, I mean, Ruby, that was very thoughtful, and you're right. I saw your comments, and they were motivational. They make me think myself, about how we can be doing better. Barb, I want to turn it to you. Yeah, I will say, these panels, when you have this kind of a conversation, they end up going much faster than we like. We're down to 15 minutes. I want to make sure, Barb, you get a chance to talk, and we're getting a lot of questions. So, but I do think this is an important topic, and I want to make sure we get a chance to Barb, hear from you on this issue as well.
Well, first of all, Mike and Ruby, incredible, inspiring statements. And in some ways it shouldn't be inspiring because we should be living in a different world, but we're not. So insightful, emotional, impactful, a lot of food for thought. What I wanted to share was my own experience in the last couple of years in working for the champion of diversity, equity, inclusion at Looker. Someone who in her career, her education, experienced issues around both race and gender. And she was the champion who brought that to our CEO and his staff, to the board of directors, and so this speaks to what can companies do? And so you like many things, you need a champion. You need to build the case, and that case needs to be partly about the business results. And I think there's many studies over many years that show diversity of experience and perspective across all the different types that we're talking about today make better, more comprehensive decisions, business plans, new products, innovative products, the more diverse input you have to that. And that there was a business case, but there was also a values case, especially for a company really focused on values and how we show up for each other, how we hire. We have we had what we call the check your ego at the door value, and we have a value around, no assholes. There's a different term for it, but it's basically that. And I think if you hire with that perspective, but let me talk about hiring. So Looker's a data company. We're a business analytics data platform. It works in your database. So we're not taking a lot of our customers' data, but we looked at our own hiring data and said, where can we and should we do better? And so I think data is important, and the privacy lens on that data. How can you look at data in a way that actually helps you understand where you stand, understand where you can do better, and then kind of like that zero defect, you've got to set an incredibly aggressive high bar. So let's say you want to increase representation of women engineers by 50, you want to double that. Well, what does that look like in terms of numbers? And then you set goals around, well, if we're looking at increasing that number and understanding how the hiring process is a funnel that narrows, then you have to look at where are we sourcing our candidates? Broaden your sourcing of candidates. Go to women's colleges. Go to some of the not the first colleges and universities you think of in terms of engineering candidates and business candidates and marketing candidates. Looking at Black universities, looking through other channels, leveraging networks as well, but making that funnel really big, because then you can't say there's nobody out there. And I think what we looked at is they're out there. We just weren't looking for them in the right way. So how do we find them? Use the data to help you figure out where to find them, and then make sure that your hiring process is targeting all levels. So I'm not talking about just let's hire a couple of executives of color or women for our picture on the website of the executive team. That it's at all levels, because you want to hire in at all levels, from entry level to mid-level to higher level management to executive. And of course, prioritize, have the board. Not every board wants to look at what's our makeup, because we all kind of know each other and we invested in this company, but who else should be here that can help us be a better, stronger company? So I would net it out as there are things that you can do around understanding your own situation, understanding your data, significantly broadening your funnel for hiring, and hiring at all levels. But you've got to set goals, and using data in a privacy savvy way is really important.
I want to thank all three of you for talking so personally about it, and because it matters to put these things and remind each other about them from the experiences, because it spurs us to keep these at front of mind. There's just so many things we could talk about here. We only have about 10 minutes. I'm looking at the list of questions that came in. I knew there would be a lot to cover. I want to keep this dialogue going too, but I want to make sure I can at least bucket a few things that have come up. So maybe I'll bucket them into one. Maybe each of you in 2 minutes or so, as crazy as this is, how has COVID affected you and your teams? And maybe I'll put it both one major strategic thing, where are you spending your time, or had you been spending your time advising at the strategic level? Was it on COVID and how you reopen? Was it on COVID and how you supply your product? Where were you spending time strategically, and how did it affect your operations? If you can, one thing in 2 minutes each. And maybe Barb, I'll start with you. I think I started with both Ruby and Michael.
Yeah, I'll go first. So I think it's in a couple of areas. One is business continuity plans and what those should look like, and how they need to be actually rethought, because I don't think any business continuity plan was built around the idea that everyone suddenly had to work from home. And do you have the devices, and do you have the bandwidth, and do you have the technology? And the other is actually customer facing work, which means how are you supporting the sales teams in particular, existing customers, reassuring them, which goes back to business continuity, but also speaks to, do you have a plan? If I have a problem, will you be there to support me through your support channels, through your technical support? We're in the middle of a deployment that's really critical to supporting our COVID response. Looker released what's called a data block, which is publicly available data that's actually being used through Looker and other business analytics technology to actually model both COVID infections, distribution, but also responses to that. It can be used in a number of different ways.
Michael?
I think you asked me about mentoring, yeah?
Would you like to focus on that? I'm happy to.
I would love to.
Okay. So
Yeah, my 2 minutes.
maybe I'll turn it. Why don't I go in this order then? Ruby, did you have anything else that you wanted to cover on the COVID front?
Mine is super short.
Okay.
It's simply a mixture of supporting a pivoting business in my normal day job. And then I have a wonderful employee who's been doing 2 tranches of our COVID related work, which would of course be both employees and back to work, as well as how we're doing new features, services, whatever on the business side. Personally, as I've already said, I've been spending an enormous amount of time on people.
Well, and the people front, then I know one thing that we wanted to talk about, but we're probably going to have less time is, and Michael, I'll turn to you. How do you see your role as a leader in mentoring or elevating and teaching others in the profession? And what advice would you have for folks who are coming up and looking for a role like you have?
Sure. Well, I mean, I love to mentor, whether the mentees love it or not. I learn a lot from the process, and there's absolutely nothing more professionally fulfilling than seeing your people and your teams, excel and succeed. So for new folks, and I've been asked this a lot, which is why I really wanted to answer it. For new folks, as privacy is, I think, really getting to the point of specialization. I would think about, if you want to get into it, finding something within privacy that you can just become the absolute best at. It can be big data, it can be locational issues, it can be MarTech, it can be ad tech, multi-jurisdictional compliance and tools. It will just make you so much more valuable. Secondly, I would say, learn tech. I don't necessarily mean that you have to code. It doesn't hurt though, but you do have to meet, engineers and product folks where they are, because they're less likely to meet you where you are. So do tours of duty, second to a tech group, shadow tech folks, go to areas of business where you might not know the business well or the operations well. Show them that you're interested and that you're trying, because they're going to be your allies in moving forward in your career. Lastly, I'd say write. Everybody's writing these days, whether it's LinkedIn or wherever, but be heard. We can be in an echo chamber within this community sometimes. So offer thoughtful opinions and analysis and challenge ideas and be bold. There are not many sacred cows in this space. But as a general observation, I would say if you're really thinking about this role, the CPO role is probably going to change dramatically in the next 10 years. There's probably going to be more centralization and alignment of functions, resulting in a more multidisciplinary role, like trust managers or chief trust officers, broader portfolios, and that include data management and operations. You're probably going to see some things continuing this morphing into the chief data officer roles. So the career field that you get in today is probably going to look very different in 10 years, and certainly maybe 5 years. It'll be different than what it is today. So thanks for the opportunity on that one.
No, that's great, Michael. Well, so look, I one question that was sort of underlying a lot of the ones I'm seeing, and we now only have a couple of minutes, so this will be like in 3 sentences or less as we wrap up. I don't want to have you 3 together having thought about this much in the profession without trying to bring sort of like a little bit of insight on things you've been thinking about. So if you had to think of an issue just an issue and maybe a couple of sentences that you think is going to be a big issue, say in the next year, that maybe folks aren't paying as much attention to, where are you spending a little bit of time thinking that maybe the rest of our community should spend a little bit of time thinking that we're not focused on right now? And Ruby, do you mind if I start with you on this one, and then we'll wrap up?
3 words: public sector governance. GDPR has it, we don't. Where's all this data going? What is the help of CCPA if it only governs private sector, and then any government agency can swoop in and use that data for something completely different? As I said, it did finally wind its way into one of the 2 competing COVID bills. And I think people are going to start worrying more about that. We're going to have to do something about it and stick it into a federal omnibus bill at some point.
That's a great one, Ruby. We could almost have a session on that. We're hearing all around the world about in order to operate, companies are having to share their data as a part of sort of a qualification step. And that does worry you, right? Because then not only here in the US, but it's like as a human being, imagining how other governments are going to use that data, I think is an incredibly important issue. So maybe we should convene another panel just on that one, Ruby, you know? Michael, why don't we go with you next? Is there an issue that's on your radar that folks may be paying a little less attention to?
Sure. I think there's going to be more consumer citizen interest, appreciation for an understanding of privacy. And simultaneously, I think you're probably going to see a rise of third-party data subject access rights managers. The more people avail themselves of that, I think it's going to be a big challenge for businesses, not just to produce, you know, DSAR reports and those things, but to really start focusing how they build those relationships with customers so that they don't avail themselves of those easy access services.
That's, again, very thoughtful, Michael. I agree with you, because it could start to proliferate and it does give you a broader waterfront among others. Yeah, that's very thoughtful. Barbara?
Yeah. I was going to say, similar to Ruby, public-private partnerships and what data sharing means, but I would build on that and say, I think specifically what we're already seeing around different types of data sharing as it relates to health data. But I actually think the discussions we're having now around diversity and inclusion and what hiring means and automated decisioning isn't new, but I think what that means in the new world of COVID and revitalize social justice issues are going to drive new changes around how we think about data, how we think about our privacy roles evolving to much more in really the data ethics piece.
Again, I agree with you. I think, you know, building on some of the conversations we were talking about justice, discrimination, and automated decision-making, you know, I think we've all been worried about the data sets that are going to drive automated decision-making and the implicit biases there. It's an incredibly interesting issue, Barb. I agree with you, especially because in Europe, those principles are kind of captured only or often primarily in the privacy laws, whereas in the US, they're often thought of as outside of the privacy laws. So it's like this interesting issue, either in or out. I mean, it's sort of like some companies think of that as part of the you know, sort of civil rights laws as opposed to privacy laws. So it's an interesting dichotomy in the way the world is thinking about that.
And will the AI rules from Europe replace some of the GDPR rules, which I think is an interesting question as a part of that.
So on behalf of all of our participants, we have an incredible number of attendees. There's a lot of questions that came in, so we're going to capture those and share them with the panelists if there's good ways for us to answer them. I really want to thank you all for donating your time for this free session. Honestly, it was just a really moving conversation for me, and I think I can tell it was moving for everybody in the audience to talk about these things. And I think we need more of these forums to just realize how we're all feeling about these issues. So thank you each, Michael, Ruby, Barbara, for participating. The rest, I'm just going to do a quick run of show before we say goodbye. So we have an Ask the Expert sort of panel starting at 2 o'clock. There's a technology and privacy protection, sort of a, what does automation really mean? That question comes up all the time. What does it mean to automate? What does it mean to bring AI to the conversation? Let me just say, not to bury the lead, I don't think the privacy world is going to be replaced by AI. I just don't think it's going to happen. There's a lot of human judgment in there, and we'll talk about that in just what does it mean. That panel's at 2:30. There's a VC, a venture capital investor panel, in which that starts at 3:30, in which some leading venture capital investors talk about what are they seeing? What are they seeing in the most innovative technologies? And to give you a sense of where that world is going. And then, of course, we have a closing keynote and a closing remarks. And our closing keynote is by Congressman Jamie Raskin. That'll be at 4:30. Ruby, Michael, Barbara, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.